Grief has a sound, not loud, not sharp, but hollow. It's the quiet that fills your house when the phone stops ringing, when the casseroles stop arriving, when people stop saying her name. My daughter, Elena, died 6 months ago, and in every whispered condolence, I heard the same unspoken question. What did you do, Margaret? Because that's what Richard told them. My son-in-law, her husband, said I was the reason she got in that car that night, said I pushed her too far, and I believed him. For a time, I let his anger settle over me like ash. I stopped visiting their home. I stopped seeing my grandson. I stopped being me. Until last week, when I opened the old Bible I'd given Elena for her 15th birthday, the one she kept by her bed, and a folded letter slipped out, her handwriting, her voice frozen in ink. And as I read her words, I realized she had never stopped trying to protect me, even from him. Now I know what really happened that night, and I know what I have to do. But before I tell you the rest of what happened, I'd love to know where you're watching from, your city or your country. I enjoy hearing that because it reminds me that every home, no matter how far away, carries its own stories too. The morning of my daughter's funeral felt muted, as if someone had turned the color down on the world and left a soft hush in its place. I put on a dress I had not worn in years, and the pearl earrings my mother pressed into my hand when Elena was born. They seemed heavier than usual, as if grief added weight to everything it touched. At the church doors, a steady stream of people folded into line. Neighbors I had not visited in months, friends who once sat at my kitchen table while our girls did homework, people who smiled with the practiced gentleness reserved for the bereaved. Each offered the same tilt of the head that said, "I am sorry, I don't know what to say." I nodded and kept moving, trying not to let my eyes find the photograph propped beside the altar. Elena, caught mid-laugh, hair lit by an October sun. I stood close enough to see the shadow of her smile and afraid that if I breathed too loudly, it might fog the glass and take her with it. Richard arrived late, as if punctuality could be traded for a more impressive entrance. He had Sam with him, my grandson, small in his suit, and they moved through the crowd like a practiced pair. Richard's suit was expensive, the fabric pulling at the chest in a way that made him look like armor rather than clothing. He did not meet my eyes. He took the front pew. When I moved to sit beside him, he shifted his shoulder so slightly that only I registered the space he left. I sat behind. That tiny omission felt deliberate. Father Miguel spoke of mysteries and mercy, of how grief settles where it must. His words passed over me like a tide. Then I felt 100 eyes find me, as if the distance between my seat and Richard's proved something about my role in the night that took Elena. People love a tidy story, someone to blame, a cause that fits into a neat sentence. After the service, the parish hall smelled of coffee and lilies. Hugs and casseroles circulated. The familiar ritual of being comforted felt like a bandage placed over something that needed more than temporary adhesion. A neighbor I had not spoken to in years gripped my forearm. "Don't carry what isn't yours," she whispered. It was kindness, awkward and earnest. Gossip does not need malice to spread, only oxygen. And Richard had been generous with his. He moved through the room with the careful composure of a man who wants others to admire his grief. When an aunt asked where I would be staying, he said loud enough that people at the coffee urn could hear, "Margaret will be at her house. We're keeping things calm for Sam." "Calm for Sam," said in a tone that reduced my presence to a disturbance. I had been the woman who kept extra pajamas in a drawer for late nights, who stayed with Sam when Elena worked evenings. My history with that child sat like an unread book on a shelf. When the line thinned, Richard came to me. "We need to talk," he said, voice low and steady, like an announcement rehearsed too often. "I'm right here," I replied. "Not now," he said. Then louder, for those approaching with a casserole, he smiled and said, "Thank you for being here for Elena. It means a lot to us." Us. The pronoun closed like a door. I found Sam by the cookie table, icing on his fingers. He took my hand without looking up. "Can I come to your house later?" he asked, small and hopeful. "Of course," I said. Richard's palm came down over our hands like a lid. "Not tonight," he told the boy. "We'll be with Daddy's side." He smiled in a way that pronounced a verdict. Sam slid his hand free and tucked it into his pocket. The quiet motions children learn to make when adults decide. Outside the church, the air had a bite, and the light felt thin. I stood near a cluster of smokers because the sting in my eyes gave me something ordinary to blame. Richard approached without a cigarette and spoke close. Words meant only for me. "You won't be coming by for a while," he said. Sam needs predictability. Sam needs his grandmother, I answered. Sam needs to learn that choices have consequences, he said. Then he said the thing that lodged like a pebble. You pushed her, Margaret. You fed her doubts. She called you before she left. You had 20 minutes to calm her down. You didn't. He said it with a clinical lightness, the sort of tone men use when they have decided the shape of a story for others. I tasted the old machinery of accusation, how neatly it fits into a narrative where a woman is always a cause or a cure. I told her to stay, I said. The memory was sharp, Elena's breath thin with tears. My voice, don't drive, stay, I'll come, offered like a rope. She had laughed through the sobs and said she was already in the car. I told her to stay, I repeated, each syllable insisting, and she didn't, he replied. Some of us accept responsibility, some of us deflect. He left as if he had placed an item on a counter and walked away, expecting the room to tidy itself. At home, the house made itself known, with little noises my grief had never noticed. Pipes coughed, floorboards practiced their creaks. I hung the dress on a hook and did not fold it, because folding felt like finalizing something that refused to be finite. I set a plate for Elena and then removed it. I poured tea and did not drink it. The rituals of care felt both trivial and immense at once. A week lay across me like a sleeping weight. People called. I let the answering machine take their voices. This is Margaret. Leave a message. I saved them all and listened to none. On Wednesday, Richard's sister arrived with groceries and a hug that lasted long enough to count for consolation. He's beside himself, she said into my shoulder. Be patient with him. I have been patient, I said. She lowered her voice. There are documents, she said cautiously. Insurance, paperwork. Richard is overwhelmed. Of course, I said, because proper replies often sound bland on a table surrounded by sharp things. That night, I walked into Elena's old room and let the memories press close. A cracked mug she kept for reasons only she understood. Posters peeling at the edges. The quilt my mother had sewn folded in a box. On top sat the Bible I had given her when she turned 15. I set my hand on the cover and drew it back. Not yet. Timing matters. 2 Saturdays later, I went to bring Sam a jigsaw I had found in the attic. Richard opened the door with practiced hospitality. The living room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something new. Where Elena's photo had been, candles stood arranged. The room had been rearranged to make absence tidy. I want a few things, I said in the kitchen. Books, the quilt, the jar of beach stones. He counted them off with the efficiency of someone cataloging an estate. Fine, he said, the single-syllable dismissal that both grants and denies. When I asked for the bedside Bible, his face shifted, the brief flicker of calculation. I'll look for it, he said. I can wait, I answered. Not now, he replied. Soon. Sam watched us, one hand knotted in his pocket. Can I come next weekend? He asked. If your father agrees, I said, holding Richard's gaze until he had to either consent or become the man who denied a child something obvious to a grandmother. Next weekend, he said too quickly. Later he would text, we'll see. Back at my kitchen table, I opened a box and found a receipt creased and smudged, dated a few weeks before Elena's death. It was for an appointment at a law firm. The firm's name was clear, though the reason was mostly obscured by a coffee stain. If Elena had seen a lawyer, she had been moving toward a decision, not drifting. The thought steadied me like a piece of furniture placed where it belongs. I wrote the firm's name on my list and added, Ask Richard for bedside Bible. I texted him. Please have Elena's bedside Bible ready for me tomorrow at 2. The reply came, we'll see. I set the phone face down and placed my hand on the old Bible as if it were a pulse. If he would not give me the book that might hold her last words, then I would find the places she had left them. The receipt sat on the table like a small witness. Between the rain and the refrigerator's hum, a decision clicked into place. I would look for Elena's truth, and I would not be passive about it. The days after the funeral folded into a slow, relentless routine. Calls I did not answer, casseroles I did not open, friends who asked the wrong questions too softly. Richard's voice, measured, sure, seemed to travel with the errands I ran, an accusation that fit neatly into small talk. You pushed her, people repeated in whispers, as if the phrase were a talisman that explained everything. I tried to speak to him once outside his house while Sam chased a bird. He looked like a man trying on new posture. His suit adjusted so it read more like presentation than grief. Why would you say such a thing? I asked. His eyes acquired that patient look of someone convinced the world needs shaping. It's not what I said, he replied. It's what I saw. She called you. She was upset. She left. Choices have consequences, Margaret. Choices made after a phone call where someone shouted at her? I said. You were home. You could have gone after her. His mouth tightened. That night is closed. We have to protect Sam's routine, he said, the message wrapped politely to sound like care. Then, as if summing, you had 20 minutes. You didn't calm her. His words slid into the town's conversations like a practiced refrain. At the bake sale and in the post office line, they set the tone. Neighbors who had once called about plants now asked if I was coping. People who welcomed my daughter's laughter seemed relieved to have a reason to nod. A tidy story took root, and I watched it take shape as others repeated it with the conviction of those who prefer neat chapters. Still, the receipt from the law firm would not let me rest. If Elena had sought counsel, she had done it with intention. People move toward doors when they mean to leave a room. I called the firm and left a message. The receptionist returned my call with a phrase I expected: client confidentiality. It was a polite wall. So I went to the brownstone where the firm sat, unremarkable, steady. The receptionist who met me had the professional gentleness of someone who hears sorrow every day. I'm Margaret Hale, I told her. My daughter had an appointment. Could you tell me who she planned to see? She pressed her lips together and said, I'm sorry for your loss. Then she tapped at her screen. We can't disclose details, but there is an attorney assigned, Lawson. He's not available today. You can leave your contact, and he'll call if appropriate. I left my number and walked home with the receipt folded in my palm until it softened. Having a name and a day changed the shape of things. It turned rumor into a path I could follow. At home, I began an inventory of smallness, a canceled dentist appointment on a kitchen calendar, a delivery notice tucked into Elena's mail, the faint scent of perfume on a scarf that wasn't hers. I became a cataloger of oddities. Lists make you feel less at the mercy of chance. Maritza watched me with that combination of neighborly nose and allegiance. He's shaping the script, she said one morning over coffee. He gives the cast their lines and then blames the set for the scene. How do you know? I asked. Because when he says you pushed her, people tighten their faces and watch you like a child, she said. It's easier to trust the man telling the story than the woman living inside it. Her words stung, but held truth. Credibility is a bank where women withdraw less often. One afternoon, Father Miguel stopped by with a small roast and the kind of silence that is actually company. He sat with his hands folded and said, Richard has been precise about paperwork, insurance, guardianship. He tapped his fingers as if arranging facts. He asked what documents Elena had. He asked how things would be managed. Organized, I thought. The word settled like another clue. Back in Elena's room, I emptied boxes onto the bed and sifted for ordinary things. In a paperback, I found a second receipt from the same firm, a date different from the first. 2 entries suggested intention. It was not aimless when a person travels to a law office twice. People visit lawyers when they mean to change the shape of what comes after them. I kept a small notebook in my bag and wrote down times Richard's responses felt oddly rehearsed, the days a delivery arrived unannounced, the nights he left early and returned later with a coffee stain at his collar. I recorded small things that, together, might make a picture. A list is a kind of armor. Gossip came in envelopes and stray voices. A note slipped into my hand at the bakery read, Saw him with a red-headed woman at the cafe 2 months ago. A teenager returning a library book told me his aunt had seen Richard at the marina with a woman who looked ready to go. Whether true or not, the suggestion lodged in the house like a splinter. I also learned small mercies. The receptionist at the firm called back in a different tone one afternoon. There are 2 entries in Elena's name, she said. The notes mentioned child welfare planning. She would not explain more, but the phrase itself felt like air in a locked room. Child welfare planning. Someone looking forward. Someone laying foundations. One evening, when Sam sat at the kitchen table drawing boats, he asked, Did Mommy get scared of me? The question landed like a stone. Why would you think that, love? I asked. He shrugged and fiddled with the hem of his sweater. Dad said Mommy always wanted different things. The words stung. Children repeat what adults plant. If someone had been pulling at the soil, I would need to clear the weeds. I took to small acts of surveillance that were as harmless as they were strategic. Watching the marina on an ordinary afternoon to note who came and went, jotting down license plates, the hours Richard left the house, and the calls he answered. I asked Rosa at the florist if any unusual deliveries had arrived for their address. She remembered a courier dropping a legal-sized envelope the week before, but could supply no more than curiosity. I also began to learn the language of law. At the library, I read leaflets on guardianship, conservatorship, and the way courts consider the protection of minors. Words that once sounded dull, petition, beneficiary, trustee, now tasted of possibility. If Elena had been planning for Sam, I might not be able to pry open her files, but I could learn how to make a case. Knowledge felt like a salve. It was not vengeance, it was preparation. A woman at the bakery who had once worked with Elena on a charity fair told me, "She's the sort of person who makes a list and checks it twice." The phrase lingered. If someone wasn't capable, did it mean illness, neglect, or a precaution against a man who might not be reliable? The suggestion sat with me all night like a coiled rope. As days folded into one another, I set a plan. I would speak to Lawson if I could. I would ask Father Miguel for anything else he'd heard. I would keep a record. I would not explode into public denunciations. I would move with care, the way a woman measures a newborn's blanket. Quiet action felt fitting. Grief had been loud enough. Now was the time for deliberate steps. At night, I laid the 2 receipts side by side on the kitchen table under a warm lamp and traced the edges. The hum of the refrigerator, the calluses on my hands from years of dishwashing, and the slow breath of the house were my witnesses. Elena had been planning. Planning implies intention, and intention changes motive. If she had prepared something for Sam, someone might have wanted to prevent it. If he had reason to fear what she planned, the motive tucked into conversations as choices became decidedly more complicated. I'm not a woman who storms offices or shouts from rooftops. I'm a woman who gathers papers, records times, and waits until the right person walks into a room. There is a kind of work that hems grief into purpose, and that is the work I began. Collect, note, prepare, and wait. I told myself I would not be theatrical about it. The Bible arrived like a small, patient thing folded in a tea towel among Richard's boxes when I went back to collect what he said he could not find. He had sent a text, 2 words, chilly as glass. It's ready. I carried the parcel on the bus with a carefulness I had not expected, feeling the weight of paper and the odd geometry of grief pressing into my hands. At the kitchen table, I untied the towel and opened the cover with slow reverence. On the inside cover, in my own handwriting, it read, "To Elena, may these words find you when you need them. Love, Mum." The inscription made a small private ache. Tucked into the flyleaf was a cream envelope with my name across it in the handwriting I had learned to read when she was 5. Mum. Seeing my name made the house tilt in a way that felt both tender and urgent. I should have made tea. Instead, I slid a thumbnail under the flap and eased the paper free. Elena's script, small, economical, the way she wrote when she wanted to be understood, began, "If you are reading this, I am sorry I was not clearer. I thought I could tell you when it was safer." Then a line struck like a bell. "Do not listen to Richard when he tells you I left because you told me to. I left because I was afraid for Sam." Her words redrew the night. She wrote about meetings with an attorney named Lawson and a plan, not an escape, but a protection arrangement for our grandson. She described temporary guardianship, funds set aside for immediate care, and a list of adults she trusted to act if she could not. The language was spare and practical, not panicked. It read like someone making sure a child would have the outlines of a life, even if the house changed unexpectedly. She spoke of a fear she called the other arrangement, an unnamed pressure that accompanied kindness, and warned me, do not trust any woman who offers comfort while men profit. She circled a name, Claire, and underlined it twice. The ink trembled in places, like the place where someone breathes faster to get a word out before a door shuts. A postscript read, "If you need proof, Lawson has copies. Tell him I asked you to." My hands shook, but not only from sorrow. Recognition came like a photograph developing in slow light. Elena had not been drifting. She had been building redundancies and routes and paper trails. Someone preparing for Sam is not a woman who drifts. She is someone arranging contingencies. If she had been planning care, then the simple sentence Richard offered, "You pushed her," no longer fit. The map had changed. I folded the letter and slid it back into the Bible, where it would not be obvious to casual hands. Then I took my notebook and cross-checked dates. Lawson's name appeared in my notes now, a receipt, a firm name, a scribbled phone number. I called, fingers half afraid I would mispronounce the syllables of a life I no longer had the right to edit. Lawson and Partners answered with the professional softness of an office that organizes futures. A receptionist's voice asked how she might help. This is Margaret Hale, I said. My daughter Elena had appointments here. I need to speak with Mr. Lawson about documents in her name that concern my grandson. There was typing, a polite pause. Mr. Lawson is in a meeting until 4, she said. You can leave your contact and he'll call. I said I would come at 4. The firm smelled of paper and coffee. It sat like a deliberate, well-kept thing in a block of more hurried businesses. Lawson met me in a glass-walled office. He was a man who looked practiced at bearing burdens you could count. Mid-50s, salt and pepper hair, hands that had signed many papers. He did not offer me sympathy. He offered copies and dates and a quiet ledger of fact. She came twice, he said, sliding a slim folder across the desk. She was careful and practical. She left instructions, contingency plans for Sam should anything happen to her. Inside were photocopies, meeting notes, a typed memo about temporary guardianship and emergency contact protocols, and a form naming trusted adults authorized to act for Sam in an emergency. The documents wore their plainness like armor: redundancy, emergency provision, immediate care arrangements. She had named backups and layered them like a gardener plants hedges to keep a child safe from the wind. Lawson said she wanted more than one person named. She wanted layers of protection. Redundancy, he said again, as if repeating the word would make it more concrete. It settled in my chest like mortar. Elena's plan suggested deliberation, not despair. Someone who lays a foundation for a child is thinking ahead. Someone with motive to stop that plan might have reasons that did not begin with my name. I left the firm with certified photocopies tucked like talismans in my bag. The receipts, the letter, the photocopies together began to redraw the story. If she had been preparing for Sam's welfare, then motive shifted. A tidy accusation had been handed out to neighbors like a pamphlet. Now the paper in my hands was a counter-narrative, factual and stubborn. I felt a strange mixture of relief and fury. Relief that she had planned, fury at the idea anyone might have tried to prevent it. Back home, I matched the dates with the small care of someone tracing a map. Father Miguel told me he'd heard Richard asking pointed questions about insurance and guardianship. The parish priest's interest was practical rather than gossipy. He found the details worrisome. I wrote it down. In a week, we would talk about witnesses. For now, the list lengthened. Neighborhood conversations became research. At the bakery, I asked about deliveries. Rosa at the florist remembered a legal-sized envelope the week before. An acquaintance mentioned seeing Richard with a woman at a cafe. Another neighbor thought she glimpsed a courier dropping an envelope. The details were scattershot, but accumulating. Little things strung together make a stronger chord than a single loud accusation. I arranged for certified copies to be prepared and thought about witnesses. A document matters more when someone ordinary, someone known for quiet reliability, can attest to its chain. Maritza, my neighbor, had been a steady presence since the funeral. Casseroles without fuss, a hand at the gate with Sam, an ear that did not gossip. Lawson agreed she would be a sensible witness. He would prepare sealed copies to present when appropriate, advising discretion at every step. I did other things that felt discreet but fierce. I watched the marina, Richard's favored place to take walks, with the patience of a woman who knows how to measure a routine. I wrote down the times he left and returned, the cars he drove, the cafe he frequented. I asked Rosa at the florist if there had been unusual orders at his address. She remembered a late envelope. I began to assemble a ledger of ordinary proofs, dates, names, witnesses, small constants that outlived a rumor. As I walked the marina, I thought of Elena's soft laugh and the way she would point at a boat and say, "That one looks like trouble." And I would laugh too. Now every detail had weight. I watched Richard across the water and felt a strange, unsentimental clarity. Men who rehearse control often look calmer than they feel. Calmness, I discovered, can be a practiced performance. Sam came by to see me, cheeks raw from a game and hair sticking up in a way that made him look both grown and remarkably small. He told me about a card game while he drew a boat with a shaky mast. Children are honest about what anchors them. When he asked, "Did Mommy get scared of me?" the question fell like a stone. He had repeated an adult meaning he did not need. I told him no, of course not, and later learned his father had said that Elena wanted different things. Words planted in a child can grow into reasons he will carry. I began to learn the language of law the way one learns a map: guardianship, contingency, trustee, beneficiary. Leaflets that had once seemed dull, petitions, procedures, forms, took on the density of tools. Knowledge was not aggression, it was preparation. If Elena had left plans, then understanding their structure made me less vulnerable to other people's versions of the truth. Lawson called the following week to say the file was ready. He suggested a meeting with a witness present when we presented the copies, a plain, ordinary person who could attest to the chain of custody. Maritza agreed without fuss. We would meet at the firm. Lawson would explain the next steps. I practiced my voice, keeping it even. My anger, when it rose, felt like a useful heat rather than a wildfire of accusation. Evenings were the hardest, the house filled with ghosts of small things. Elena's mug, the sweater half folded, a bookmark between cookery pages. I would open the Bible and touch the flyleaf where her letter rested, feeling the indentation of the ink, as if it were a pulse. Sometimes I read a line and then set the book down to make a list of names to call. The work of grief had become a work of investigation, and in that work I found a form of purpose. There were setbacks. A rumor about Richard and a red-headed woman turned out to be a confusion. The woman was an old college friend in town for a conference. Not every whisper bears fruit. Still, the small proofs kept adding up. A delivery note here, a coffee stain there, an odd sequence of behavior. People make narratives when they are frightened. I intended to replace rumor with records. Little victories felt domestic. A clerk at the registry who was kind. A photocopy that came back clear. Lawson's secretary scheduling a private meeting. I felt less like a woman pushed into reaction and more like someone assembling a case with the slow deliberation of a seamstress piecing fabric. Every fact was a stitch. One afternoon, Lawson said carefully, "We should consider notifying the court if the situation appears to threaten the child's welfare." The idea of court felt like walking from a kitchen into a cathedral of papers, but I recognized it as a path forward, not vengeance, not spectacle, a legal channel that might anchor the protections Elena had intended. At night, when Sam slept at my house after a Friday visit, I would sit with the Bible on my lap and read Elena's words aloud, as if they were a map I had to learn by heart. Her phrases were practical, a mother's voice across a distance. She had not written blame, she had written instruction. That alone felt like a small, stubborn victory. She had not left the world without ordering a way to care for the boy she loved. The more I worked, the more my indignation settled into an efficient center. I was not a woman who wanted drama. I wanted preparation. The work quieted me in ways grief could not. In quiet, I organized witnesses, arranged appointments, and kept the lamp on so the letter stayed warm like an ember. When the day came to collect the sealed copies at Lawson's office, I took Maritza with me. We walked in like two ordinary women who had been given instructions in an unusual language and had learned to speak it. Lawson handed the sealed packet with a small nod. No flash of triumph, only paperwork and the steady, bureaucratic means to be heard. The documents were not vindication, they were tools. On the bus afterward, the city moved around us. Markets, buses, a man selling flowers. I held the packet like a necessary charge. Elena had given me a map. I had gathered the markers. The road ahead was not simple, but at least it had a line to follow. I would gather every paper, every witness, and speak calmly, because Elena's plan deserves to be honored, not swept aside again. The day I decided to read Elena's letter aloud to someone else, the sky was the peculiar, thin blue of early autumn, sharp but not cruel. I had rehearsed the moment in my head like a prayer, the words, the pauses, the way I would steady my hand when a name appeared. Reading is a small violence. It lays out what was folded and hides nothing. I asked Maritza to come to my kitchen because she is plain and steady, and because I knew she would not flinch at the parts that might hurt most. She arrived with bread wrapped in cloth and the sort of look that says, "You can tell me anything." I made tea and we sat at my kitchen table with the Bible between us, the lamp making a small pool of light. Sam was at school. The house had the quiet of a place holding its breath. For a few moments I considered not opening it at all, keeping the letter as a private relic, a torch I would carry myself. Then I thought of Elena's handwriting, clear, intentional, and I felt the need to make the air around her words plain and shared. I slid the letter from its fold and unfolded it slowly. The ink had that slight ache of a hand that wanted clarity, neat, small, economical. I read aloud the first paragraph where she explained the meetings with Lawson, the forms she'd signed, and the reason for them. A provision for Sam in case of an emergency. A plan that named more than one adult as possible guardians. Maritza listened without breathing loudly and nodded as if taking directions. Her hands were folded in her lap like a silent accord. When I read the line, "Do not listen to Richard," when he tells you I left because you told me to. I left because I was afraid for Sam. Maritza's eyes went soft, and she made a small sound, part sympathy, part comprehension. I kept reading. Elena's letter did not plead. It catalogued dates, names, places, and a particular phrase that repeated like a stitch, the other arrangement. She wrote about being offered help by someone who smiled easily and then asked intrusive questions about money and wills. She detailed a woman who had suggested managing matters if Elena ever needed to step back, and she circled a name, Claire, underlining it twice, as if to warn me by emphasis. When I reached the part where Elena mentioned a meeting at the marina that had left her unsettled, my throat thickened. She wrote that Claire had offered to help manage things if Elena ever needed to step back, and that Richard had seemed more willing than alarmed. The sentence was spare, but the implication pressed between my ribs. If someone had been arranging an alternate setup that would concentrate control with certain adults, it could have changed who had authority over decisions for Sam. I stopped and looked at Maritza. The woman who had brought bread was now a person with a notepad and a ready pen, someone who took in evidence the way a midwife takes in life, with attention and a steady hand. "Do you remember Claire?" I asked, and Maritza repeated the name as if tasting it, then shook her head. "No, but the florist saw a woman visiting Richard the week before," she said. She had the sort of smile that makes people give things away. We spent the next hour filling the holes that the paper could not. Times when Richard left early, the courier receipt, the coffee stain on a form. We made lists and circled names. The letter had given me a map. Maritza helped by filling in paths I had not noticed. She suggested witnesses, small people of habit who could attest that a courier came or that Richard met someone at the cafe. When she left, she hugged me and said, "We have to be careful how we use this." She meant the letter, but she also meant everything that followed. The right words wield power. The wrong words make us look like women shouting into the wind. I agreed. This wasn't theater. This was a quiet unspooling that required discretion. I took the photocopies to Lawson. He read the letter with the sparing expression of a man used to paperwork and the ways in which paper can alter reputations. "This changes things," he said simply. "It suggests intent, planning for a child. If someone interfered with that plan, we have a reason to take steps." He advised me on protocol, sealed copies, witnesses, possible motions that could secure short-term protections for Sam while we investigated. The law is not the place for melodrama. It is a sequence of doors, forms, and witness statements. We scheduled a meeting with a court clerk to discuss the possibility of a protective order and the immediate steps to ensure Sam's welfare. Lawson was careful. He recommended restraint in how we approached people. "There is a difference," he said, "between making a case and making a spectacle." For the next few days I moved like a woman adjusting a loom, threads in the right order, hands steady. I called 2 witnesses who had been in receipt of deliveries. One, a courier, remembered dropping a legal-size envelope. Another, a cafe barista, recalled a woman with a steady smile who left quickly. Maritza agreed to come to the law office and identify the photocopies. Father Miguel wrote a letter attesting to his knowledge of Richard, asking about insurance and guardianship, and he offered to speak to any official who might need corroboration. Meanwhile, Richard's behavior grew oddly precise. He started checking his phone more often during conversations and left the house at odd hours with a coat, even if the day was warm. He smiled the way men do when they have practiced the gesture. Once, at the post office, I watched him watch a woman with a red scarf, someone too casually attentive to be purely accidental. My notes, careful lists of times and places, felt less obsessive and more strategic. The court hearing arrived with the bland formality of clerk's office, upholstery, and fluorescent lights. Lawson instructed me to be factual. He told me to let the paper do the talking. The judge listened, a middle-aged woman with a face that had seen the ordinary cruelties people manufacture. Maritza sat beside me, hand on my knee like a small anchor. I felt my hands clench not out of fear, but to hold myself in a shape the court could accept. When Lawson presented the photocopies and the original letter, the judge read them slowly. Richard sat across from me, expression neutral, the practiced calm of a man who has rehearsed his grief in order to write the rest of us into his story. The judge asked him direct questions about the documents and about the marina meeting. He answered with measured tones and made a small flinch over a misremembered date that a careful listener could notice. Lawson pointed out the inconsistency gently, and the judge made a note. The hearing did not resolve the entire question. Courts move with caution, and their vocabulary is slow to reach the language of motive. But the clerk suggested interim measures, supervised visitation, and a temporary review of any paperwork affecting Sam's custody. It was not a dramatic victory. It was a small, necessary tightening of a net. Outside the courthouse, a reporter asked for a comment. I declined. I did not want my words to be rearranged into a headline or turned into gossip that dried out the facts. The press eats stories and leaves bones. I would not let that happen to Elena. At home that evening, the Bible lay on my kitchen table like a small altar. I opened to the flyleaf and smoothed the page with my thumb. The handwriting seemed quieter now, its urgency folded into patient instruction. I had shown the letter to someone else, and the world had become a little wider for that act. The photocopies had given the letter company. But a question arrived, like an insect I could not chase away. If someone wanted to prevent Elena's plan, why would they? What would they gain by concentrating control? Money is one shape, guardianship another. But there are subtler currencies: status, connections, quietly wielded influence. The suspicion itched and would not stop. In the small hours I woke thinking of Claire and of the smile that coaxed people to give things up. I walked the rooms of my house and wrote down names that might be connected. Friends of Richard, colleagues, a woman at a fundraiser who had once asked detailed questions about family wills. The list grew, a map of shadows. I slept poorly. The work of preparation has its own kind of exhaustion. Still, there was a steady energy beneath it, the conviction that Elena had not left things to chance and that the right methodical steps could preserve what she had tried to ensure. I was no longer only a mother in grieving. I was a keeper of a paper trail. The next morning, a message from Richard arrived. "Let's keep this peaceful for Sam." It read like a reminder to keep the public stage tidy. I turned the message over in my mind until it looked like a folded paper boat, then set my phone down. There are people who want tidy stories because tidy stories are easy. There are people who prefer power quietly consolidated rather than shared. The law is slow, but it listens to paper and witness. Elena had left me both. The path ahead was not simple, but I would walk it measured and deliberate, with witnesses and photocopies and the small, stubborn faith that truth arranged itself when someone finally took the work of paperwork seriously. The day I decided to stop waiting was not spectacular. It was an ordinary Tuesday with a folder of photocopies on my lap and the original letter folded against my heart. Lawson had told me the law moves by forms and evidence, not by speeches. I believed him. Still, I felt readiness in my chest, as if something finally aligned. Maritza came with coffee and a steady face. We walked into Lawson's office carrying Elena's letter, like a small altar. He told us we would petition for a temporary guardianship review and request supervised visitation until the court assessed the situation. The clerk stamped our papers and the case gained a pulse. The judge scheduled a hearing. Richard's team moved quickly. His lawyer suggested mediation and asked we keep matters private. The court, however, operates within its own logic. At the hearing, Lawson presented the photocopies, the receipts, the original letter. Maritza testified about the courier. Father Miguel confirmed Richard's queries about insurance and guardianship. The judge read, asked direct questions, and granted temporary supervised visitation and a review of recent changes to Sam's arrangements. It was not a final victory, but it meant the child would not be left to decisions made in back rooms. Outside the courthouse, a reporter asked for comment. I declined. I did not want Elena's words turned into a headline. Maritza squeezed my hand and said, "You did the right thing." I thought of Sam, and I knew I had. We agreed to a limited mediation with lawyers present. In a small windowed room, Richard used a practiced gentleness that sounds persuasive in public. "Margaret," he began, "I never meant—" "You meant what you said," I replied. Saying his phrase back to him removed its charm. "You told people I pushed her. You turned private grief into a public accusation. That affects the child." He tried to defend himself with the cadence of rehearsed facts. I put the Bible on the table and slid Elena's letter across it. The paper is not a spectacle. It is an instruction. He read without theatrics. A muscle near his mouth moved, and he flinched. Claire's name had already trailed through neighborhood gossip. When Claire described her offers of help, she framed them as kindness, an offer to manage appointments, to ease schedules. Kindness, when misapplied, can be power in disguise. The court asked investigators to examine recent contacts and arrangements. Paperwork began to pull secrets into view. Investigators requested bank records and communications. Lawson guided every step. I spent afternoons compiling lists and evenings, tucking Sam in with a story. The temporary measures held. Supervised visitation gave Sam steadiness. He could see his father without chaos. One morning, an interim report arrived, irregularities in recent arrangements, and a recommendation for a fuller audit. The document was not a verdict, but it meant scrutiny was moving. It meant someone would look at pattern rather than accept the tidy story. Weeks passed. Richard retreated into longer office hours. Claire slipped from social events. People whispered. The whispers changed tone once documents spoke. The law's slowness is patient. Papered facts can outlast rumor. Then, months later, Richard came to the door unescorted. He looked smaller, as if the costume of certainty had worn thin. He spoke quietly and said he was sorry for what he had said at the funeral. His apology was not grand. It was domestic and offered without flourish. He did not ask for absolution. He asked if we could make the coming years safer for Sam. "What will you do differently?" I asked. "Be present. Be on time. Let him keep his routines. Speak carefully in public," he answered. That led to small things. Punctual visits, agreed routines, notes about school events. He arranged for supervised family counseling. Whether it was genuine, only time would tell. Change is shown in habit, not promises. Legal processes continued. Investigators found communications that warranted more questions. The audit expanded. The court reiterated supervised visitation and set further hearings. Each piece of paper, each witness, tightened the weave protecting Sam. The process changed me in small, practical ways. I learned the rituals of paperwork, how to order certified copies, how to ask questions without sounding accusatory, how to summon witnesses without alarming them. I learned to preserve my voice for the right moment and to let Lawson speak when the court required legal language. That discipline kept my indignation from spilling into useless fury. It became a steady engine: collect, record, present. I often ached to hold Elena and tell her everything would be different. That ache remained. Under it ran a clearer purpose: make sure Sam's life would not be at the mercy of someone else's arrangements. It was a slow kind of love, a ledger of small truths compiled so a child would have predictable mornings and a safe bed to return to. When auditors asked for more documents and investigators queried communications, I did not panic. I had the paper, the witnesses, and the letter. Those things build a language courts understand. I had turned grief into that language, and in doing so, I felt less like a woman attacked by rumor and more like a guardian working within the system. Months into the process, I took Sam to a small fair. He rode the Ferris wheel and laughed when I made silly faces. He asked for cotton candy and one more turn. Protecting that smallness is why I had done the work. I held him at the top of the wheel and watched the town go small beneath us. The day felt ordinary and repaired. When I walk past the courthouse now, it looks less like a place of final judgment and more like a room where slow truths are built. The quiet work of collecting documents and witnesses is not glamorous. It is careful and legal, and it works. In the end, Elena's letter did what she intended. It drew a line around Sam's future and asked me to stand guard. I stand guard, not as a vigilante, but as someone who understands that ordinary paperwork is where protection takes root. The reckoning has been quiet, but it has been real. For now, that is enough. After months of paperwork, quiet appointments, and small, careful reckonings, the house began to feel like a place with rules again. The temporary measures held long enough for investigators to follow threads. Slow, legal processes pulled a few things into daylight that rumor could not reach. Richard's public certainty frayed. Claire's visits thinned. The town's whispers changed shape as documents spoke where gossip once filled the gaps. I do not pretend everything was tidied into one neat ending. The courts are deliberate, and the heart does not stop aching because a judge signs an interim order. But Elena's letter did what she clearly intended. It made a plan legible, and it asked someone to stand watch. I stood watch. I learned how to order certified copies and how to ask for testimony without sounding like a woman shouting into a storm. I learned that patience can be its own kind of force. Sam sleeps over now and tells me stories about his day, small things that make a life: his math problem, the way his teammate cheered, a new book he loves. Those ordinary mornings are the reward for quiet, steady work. When he wakes and finds his breakfast set and his shoes lined by the door, he learns that people keep promises. That is protection I can give him every day. There is a simple dignity in boundaries. saying no to being spoken for, saying enough to accusations that rearrange truth, and insisting on documents over rumor. These are not grand gestures. They are the small, durable acts that keep a child's mornings predictable and a family intact in practical ways. I still miss Elena every hour. I still trace her handwriting and find the places where she tried to thread safety into the future. But I am not a passive witness in her story. I am its steward. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe to Femme Voices. Share where you're watching from, your city and country, and tell me, if you feel comfortable, what boundary you once had to set to protect someone you love. Your words matter. They remind us that ordinary courage is often the quietest and strongest kind.